Yeah.
If I bring up anything you don't want to talk about, you're welcome to just say fuck that.
I will, because it's I love, I've always loved reading and listening to people talk about records and whatever, but I also don't like really talking about my songs about, like, somebody says, "Hey, what's that song about?" Like, that seems to be the last thing I want to tell somebody.
That's cool.
It's their, it's theirs once they hear it, and also you're not always the best judge of what it is about.
Yeah.
You had some little kernel that got it born, but and I've had lots of songs that people come up to me and say, "Is that about this?" And I'm saying, "No, but it's a great idea."
Yeah.
There are like a strand of songwriters, and folk singers and whatever that can tell great, that get up and tell great stories, and sometimes their stories are almost more of the show than the songs,
Yeah.
But that's not me, and I like songs that they just leave a lot to the imagination, and I like to leave it there,
Yeah.
There's so many people that I see and like, oh, he's good at that, like he's funny and he's charming and he's doesn't spoil the song somehow, even people like Richard Thompson or somebody is a great, he's okay at being personable, but the people that you're not going to see Bob Dylan just explain himself,
Right.
or Neil Young, or any of those people. I went to see one of my new favorite singers, songwriters, this woman named Aldous Harding, a month or so ago, and her shows are, not only is there no explaining songs, there's barely an hello. I mean, there's not an hello. There was like a once or twice, maybe like a thank you, and that was it. And it's just more like a seance or something than it is a rock show.
Yeah.
And the crowd was so perfect. Between songs, they're dead quiet. She takes her time tuning, setting herself. It's like setting it until the air's right or whatever. She's not in any hurry to like say, "Hey, be kind to your bartenders," and all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
It is kind of a show. I mean, she is putting on an act, because I've seen different shows and every night the choreography and everything's exactly the same, but she's figured out that if she did something like, "Hey, how are y'all doing tonight?" it's gone. The spell is like broken. And so she's learned that it's just like she stays in that zone. And even when people maybe make a joke or try to say something to her on stage, she'll just kind of, she's even said, don't make me laugh.
Yeah.
Because it will be gone. And it sounds really pretentious, but it totally worked, But it's also self-serving, because I feel like I'm not good at that. Like every time I talk about something, or feel like I am supposed to be talking in a live show, if you're supposed to somehow bridge that gap and make people like you or whatever.
Yeah.
I almost always regret talking. I'm just like, man, why did I do that? These songs, that's why you write songs.
Yeah.
Is because there's things that you can't talk about, or you couldn't figure out how to talk about.
I think that's really right, man.
But it's just for me. I mean, there's, like I said, there's plenty of people that do it great and that make people love them because of that too.
Yeah. I feel like I don't want to lose what we're on, because this is a good spot. So I'm just going to throw in an intro. I might keep some of that.
That's fine.
And then, but I'm just going to keep rolling. So
yeah.
If it isn't obvious, I'm at the Red House with Jeffrey Dean Foster, and I'm really glad to be. So I'm stoked you're here, man.
I'm glad to be here. We've been talking about it for a year or two, and I'm glad to get out here in the country.
Yeah, so we were just talking about that sacred space that sometimes exists when you're on stage with an audience in front of you, and the way to treat that, and the idea of the song and dissecting it and different things. And you brought to mind a couple things. And I remember there's this record I have, a radio show that Iron and Wine was on. Have you listened to him much?
A little bit, yeah.
I really like him a lot. And he has songs that I think for a lot of people are just, they feel cryptic almost or whatever. I remember the radio show host asking him something like, "So are you into talking about the meaning of songs?" And he said, "Well, they're not essays. There's not. It's not like I set out to write a thing with a meaning. The best songs," he said, the best of mine have multiple meanings, and it's not really easy to distinguish one from another. And I was like, "Yeah, man, I like that. That makes sense." Because I don't like to just say this is what it's about and limit it to that when it's something so poetic that it's like,
Well, yeah, when
malleable.
if you put a frame around it or whatever, then that's all it's going to be,
Yeah.
ever. And and I think that's just limits it for the listener. But also, like I said, the songwriter, I don't think always knows. So maybe he's just making something up so he can
That
have
too.
something to say live. Because you really could say almost anything. If a song's like you know, metaphorical enough, you could say almost anything and make a joke about it or a story, And I'm sure a lot of these people, that are good at that live, personable, good thing, are good at that, just saying whatever they want. Politicians are like that. You just decide if they're doing an interview, they can figure out a way to say exactly what they want to say, no matter what you ask them. And that's the way interviews are like that. If you're doing, I'm sure celebrities, the ones that are good at media or whatever, have figured out this is what I'm going to get across,
Yeah.
regardless of what you ask me.
There's like always an ideal message that's over top everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, but so like I said, it's kind of a paradox because as a young person, I loved reading about music, recording records, touring, live shows. I loved reading all those things, and I like seeing documentaries about people and see how they do it. But as soon as someone starts to say this song is about, or I wrote this about, I almost just like, nope, not always, but a lot of times, because I don't want to hear that, whether it's Pete Townsend or, I mean, Ode to Billy Joe. I mean, it's about as specific a song as you can get, and you still don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Except that her, in the BBC videos that she made for that song, her blue suit and her eyeshadow looks perfect, and that was just enough, Like there's not a better looking rock, you have to go to like Ziggy Stardust to get better looking than that, So yeah, I'm fine not knowing what things mean because you feel them or not, just like movies or whatever. There's some people that can't watch a movie without stopping it. What did that mean?
Yeah.
What happened there? And I'm just like, no, just
I
let
also
it wash over me.
With that in mind, I remember once I reached a point with movies where I couldn't not think about like lighting and scripts
because you're seeing it. And
thinking about it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like listening to records if you've made records. When we were 12 or 13 years old and you heard Al Green on the radio, you just heard the song. But once you've been in a studio, you hear that snare drum and you hear like, oh, how they do that, and how in the world did they do that? That is so good, But yeah, once you know that process, then sometimes it is hard to see the big picture. So I think somehow keeping that sausage making, assembling part out of it is important, because most of the records there's no set way of making records at all. I mean, you know that, whether it's Elvis Presley Sun Sessions or whatever, that people think are like almost one of the ground zero of these rock and roll records. They thought about that. They just don't want you to know about that they worked hard at it.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't just happen, and most records are like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, there were some Bob Dylan records where you know that they didn't think about it much, and that's why they're great. Because he's been very cagey, but he acts like he didn't even know you could overdub until 1978 or something.
Yeah.
And I think he pretty much stuck to that. Yeah.
So you were born in Winston, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when did you know you wanted to do the music thing?
It was a pretty late I was pretty late bloomer to that because as a kid I was just a music fan nerd, that just like would stay up late at night listening to headphones and listening to radio and my records and just dissecting every little thing. But it didn't occur to me all that I could do it. I was a baseball player, played baseball in every configuration that I could at every age up until college, and but then when we got into college, I met some guys that were just kind of like-minded, but they weren't really musicians either. But we just loved music, and we thought about it, and we would stay up all night just thinking, like, we can do that. We couldn't. I mean, we had no skills really to do it. I took guitar lessons when I was 9 or 10, but they didn't really stick because it was a classical guitar player who was really great. He's kind of a world-class player at the time, and he was teaching me to grow my fingernails and read music and play Old MacDonald Had a Farm or whatever. And at the time, I was much more interested in watching Gilligan's Island or The Munsters or something. And but if he would have taught me to play a Chuck Berry song or a Creedence song, I might have been off, man. I was just like, but it didn't connect. The songs in some ways are kind of easy. If he had told me, if you do this, you play this A, the other chords are probably going to be D and E. Mm. They don't tell you that stuff.
Right.
They want to make you go through the whole thing. But if they told you if you do da 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 da, it's going to sound like Chuck Berry. Yeah. But that's too much of a shortcut, So maybe it was good that he didn't, I didn't get it then. But yeah, I just kept being a fan of all kinds of things. I loved radio because back when I was a kid, Top 40 radio was great because you really could hear Al Green next to Badfinger and then into Roxy Music even, so you could hear all that stuff. And in college, some of my guys, we just decided, well, we're going to figure this out, And several years later, I mean, not even that many years later, let's say 80, we probably started playing around 81 or 2, I guess. And by 86, I mean, I had a record deal with Arista Records. We were very focused in knowing that we weren't like top class pickers. None of us were like great players. We just like figured out what we could do, and we practiced like crazy. And so we were, for a brief moment, a year or so, we were really good at what we did. And now looking back, it's like, wow, we got a lot done, quickly. It didn't turn out to be anything because it was just our record deal was like a 2.5-year exercise in humility, which we learned a lot about how to take it, But yeah, now I've gotten a little bit better at playing, not much. I still don't value that very much. I value in other people. I mean, I see it in other people, like, man, they are really great.
Yeah.
And things are coming off their fingers and their voice that, they're just they're musical, beautiful, And I think whatever it is that I do is something else. It's some other making songs somehow, just kind of cobble them together with what little skills I have, and sometimes those little skills are better than the guys that can really play. I mean, because you just do different things,
Exactly.
But the ideal is when you find somebody who can really play that still has that spirit, that still remembers that it's not about notes and it's not about or how many you play, and it's not about what you learned at music school or whatever. It's they can keep that in the back of their mind and use it, because that's something that I don't have. I don't have any kind of theory.
Yeah.
My theory really did come from Top 40 radio. And then...
Eerie.
Huh?
Eerie.
Is music eerie? Yeah. Exactly. That's $1 million idea right there. So, yeah, it really was. Just like, and at the time I wasn't a musician, really. So I wasn't sitting around... When I heard Badfinger on the radio, I didn't sit down and try to play the guitar. I just didn't even occur to me. It's like, that's just a beautiful sound. And then later in my 20s, when we started trying to have bands, you know, I had to kind of start from scratch, like I don't, you know, just plinking along, you know. But my first band, you know, we right off the bat started trying to write songs because we knew that's what we wanted to do. Instead, we didn't want to be a cover band because we just didn't think we could do that. Like, we can't sound like that. But we still had to we wanted to play. So our first few, you know, year or two, we would play bars up around Boone, and we lived in Boone in the Appalachian State. And so we had to have covers, you know. But they were everything that we could think of that just represented kind of music that we liked, or that led up to music that we liked. You know, whether it was Buddy Holly and the Motown songs, and even like weird Springsteen songs and Rolling Stone songs, and, you know, I Fought the Law, and just like kind of not bar band songs, because they weren't the kind of songs that people wanted to go hear in a bar, but they were made mostly by kind of garage band type bands, you know. And so, you know, we had a bunch of those songs so we could play 2 or 3 hours a night in sweaty places and get kind of good at that. And as we kept writing more songs, then you can get rid of some of the covers. And then I guess not that many years later, we had, you know, we just did our own songs.
Yeah.
You know, just like, you know, your bands have always written your own songs. You know, I think at the time, people that we liked, like Springsteen, and some of them did do covers live. You know, like he had a vast, you know, repertoire of like rock classic kind of things that he grew up listening to. And so we thought that was okay. You know, it's cool to have that as like a reference points and stuff, you know. And so I made a Spotify playlist a year or so of all the songs that or all the songs I can remember that I've ever covered.
Really?
I'll have to send you that.
I want to check
it's
that
pretty
out.
good. It's pretty good because it's got everything from, you know, Kate Bush and Bananarama to, you know, to Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones, you know.
Man, I might have to borrow that idea. I'd be very curious to see how many songs I could actually remember having played.
And it was over you know, some of them we played a lot, you know, that were part of our thing. Some of them were songs that I just played one time because I just wanted to do it that night, you know.
Yeah.
But they're all very representational of like something that I loved. You know, there's not many gags on there.
Yeah.
It's not like, ironically. The only one I'm not sure if that was ironic. Somebody wanted me to play Muskrat Love. And they really liked, it was like his couple was at the show who was real nice, big fans, you know. And they were kind of jokingly saying that was their song when they were like teenagers, you know. And I actually like learned it. You know, it's got a bunch of weird chords that I don't ordinarily play, kind of jazzy things, you know. And I did it enough to get through it, you know. And like, you know, it's easy to laugh at that kind of song, but when you hear it, it's like, man, I love songs that don't sound like anything else.
Yeah.
Like, who would have written that? How did they come up with that? And put really great chords to it. So it wasn't just a joke.
Yeah.
You know, and that song, the album that's off of, what's the guy's name that wrote it? He made one album that's become this like odd, weird classic, and he stopped. That's it. And and the rest of them are kind of country rock, country folk songs, you know. But Muskrat Love is one of his songs. But he made a great exit. Disappear.
Yeah. I think I remember, I guess I wouldn't know if it was ironic either, but at a New Year's show, we pulled out All Apologies by Nirvana one time.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
That was kind of like just because it was New Year's and we were just kind of throwing stuff out randomly. That night we did Losing My Religion. That was really epic and weird. And there was a bunch of just little moments like that, like miniature covers, because we didn't do the whole song or whatever.
I've done some of that in the past where I'll just put covers in my songs too.
Yeah.
Like little parts of them in it or whatever.
That's fun.
And that's fun to sometimes your song reminds you of that one or vice versa, or the beat or the chords or something work, you know, and it's fun to try to wedge them in there, you know. And you don't have to learn the whole song either.
Exactly. So let me ask you this, man. So a guy starts a band, couple years later has a record deal out of North Carolina in the 80s. Like, I guess first, were you in Boone? Did it build up while you were in Boone, or did it build up while you were in town here?
It started at Boone when we were just, like I said, when we were just trying to start a band and figure out how to play.
Yeah.
And we kept playing a little bit wider range of places. And then when some of the rest of the guys graduated and finished college, we moved to Winston. Because we had been coming down here a lot, because I lived here, but staying with my parents, and they were always feeding us and everything. And so we just ended up here living out in Southside, Winston-Salem. And we started playing just a little wider because we didn't have to go to school at all. So we were just going. And we played just up and down the East Coast. We didn't go out west, but we went up to New York a lot and every place between there and then, and went down to Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina a lot. And we weren't really thinking about trying to get a record. I mean, we just thought like, well, that's something that can happen, because we'd seen people that we kind of knew. Like we knew REM and we knew Let's Active, and we saw that happen. And even though they were all very different bands and we were different from them, but we just saw that, well, that can happen. You don't have to have big hair and be from LA to do it, or you don't have to be a New York artist to do it. It can happen. And so we just had those as role models. And then we just got back to work playing and writing songs, and just kept playing and we made some little cassettes and sent them to a few people, but we didn't do like record label, mass mailings or anything.
Right.
And we just kept doing it until some people noticed and called us. And I'm still proud that we did it that way. We just like kept doing it until somebody else took notice. And we got some managers that way. And then we kept playing some more. And, we'd go to New York and people would come see us. And it was very, looking back, it's like we didn't hustle on the business side much at all. We hustled on the playing side. And but there wasn't, nowadays there's like the whole hustle of like the whole internet thing, and there's ways to become famous.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any way back then. You just had to do it and get lucky.
Yeah.
So we got these manager guys that could help a little bit, although they managed the replacements as well. And so they had their hands full a lot, just trying to keep the replacements out of, jail or the hospital or something, And, but they were great. Like, so we, it seemed, looking back on it, it seemed like kind of easy in a way, because I think we didn't think about it much. We just kept playing until it happened. We weren't like, now later, like after all that first thing happened and it kind of fell apart a few years later, then the trying to reconnect with the record business or whatever, then that was hard and next to impossible. Like then it seemed like, oh, this is impossible. But the first time it seemed like it was just a natural progression, because I think labels were, for a little while, they were just looking for rock and roll bands, because of some things that had happened. There was the REM thing that had happened. There was even the harder rock things like Guns N' Roses or whatever, People were trying to sign rock, going to see them. I mean, record company people would fly from all over the country into some little town to see us or many other bands play. And I just don't think that happens anymore. No, I mean, they wait to see you on TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
or Conan O'Brien, some
yeah,
shit.
Yeah. I think they wait to see that you've made your own way.
Yeah.
And then they swoop in and like, oh, we can help you do more.
I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in it, and I think it's because I've talked to Doug about this, talked to Richard about this. We've been having these conversations between. There's a fly in here or something. Man, I hate those little fuckers. So, anyway, I've had this conversation with a lot of people now, and I think what it comes down to for me is like, I think for a long time I believed that what we were doing in this industry was like kind of trying to let the cream rise to the top, trying to like, it was I think perceived and is perceived by people who love music as a meritocracy of sorts, where it's like, you know, oh, if it's in Rolling Stone, it's because it's the best music, or if it's on MTV, not that
Yeah,
MTV
but in its day,
exists,
I mean, even in the 60s or 70s,
Yeah.
if you made it to the radio, then they must be some of the best bands in the country.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, if they're on MTV and Rolling Stone, then somehow that has weeded out and elevated those best bands. But
Yeah.
that's not the case.
Right.
You know, sometimes it is. I mean,
It's not that they're the worst bands,
the
yeah.
replacements were on magazine covers, and they deserved it.
Yeah.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were on covers, and they deserved it. But it's still a big business that has a lot of make-believe in it, and a lot of, you know, just things that don't have anything to do with music. But it can be kind of soul-crushing when you think that when you do try to put some stock into it, until you step back and realize, no, that having that kind of success doesn't at all grade or value my songs.
Yeah.
You know, it'd been great to have had like some weird little hit song or something one day, but you just can't control any of those things. You know, there's some artists that are, you know, that are kind of so undeniable that you just, even through the record business whole maze of bull, you know, somebody like Prince or something, like, okay, he's the best. He deserves to be everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, and he worked hard at he worked hard at it. I mean, there's videos of them rehearsing, dancing and playing. That didn't happen either. They worked hard at that, you know, and he could do everything better than everybody else, you know. And so there's those kind of people that you can't argue with, you know. They're just like, okay, that's what the records are for, you know. And there's people like, you know, until 2 months ago, there was my imaginary girlfriend, Kate Bush, who never had a hit record, really. But her records, especially like Hounds of Love, I mean, that's what records are made for, is to capture that kind of weird personal thing, you know. But there's plenty of people that we love that, you know, that lived outside of the record business almost, you know.
Yeah.
But it's changed. I mean, back in the 70s, there weren't that many people making records. I mean, records came out every week, and you could go to the record store, and you could pretty much see all the records that came out.
Right.
And at least you wouldn't maybe see all of the jazz records and all of the new classical records, whatever. But pop records, you could see everybody that came out, and it's like, oh, okay, that's great. There's Ian Hunter's got a new record, you know.
You can't now.
I know.
It's crazy.
Because there's probably a couple 100,000 every week. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want to find out. I remember the figure, and the figure is kind of scary. How many songs are released on Spotify every day? 60,000 tracks a day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you don't really get to hear all of those.
No. Yeah. There's a kind of a thought experiment about the 60s and 70s about the way the record company business worked is, you know, you couldn't make a record on your own, really. You had to go to some studio, and you had to talk somebody into pressing records, and you had to talk somebody into distributing it, you know, which meant record companies had, you know, most of the power. But it made, you know, you could say, well, it kind of weeded out a bunch of
Right.
not that serious records, you know. If you just weren't really great at playing, or you weren't a great songwriter, or even not great, but just like novel. You know, there's funny novelty songs that made it through too. They deserve to come through if they entertain somebody.
Yeah.
But at least it weeded it out. You know, there's like, but now there's no weeding out. It's just everybody's making records. And the flip side of that is like, well, in the old days, these old cigar chomping businessmen were deciding who was good.
Right.
And not giving all these cool people a chance. And now everybody can make records and put it out make a record that morning and put it out that night. And that should be great. So I don't know. I don't know what's cool anymore. I did used to like hearing the top 40. And you could go through, you know, I was 15 years old or something. And half of them I'd really like, you know. Half of them I could tell, like, well, that's a dumb song, but you know, and then you could go off from there, and you found, okay, I like that guy. Who's he played with before, or what band was she in, or whatever, and you go back and you start finding your group of records. You know, even if you grew up in 70, you know, 6 or 7 when Fleetwood Mac and Fleetwood Mac Rumors came out. You got those records and you loved them, and then you realize, oh, they've been making records for 15 years. And you go back and you listen to Peter Green, you listen to Bob Welch Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac records, and so you find those things, and I assume that's the way kids do it now. And if they hear one band or act, I guess if it's like a hip hop song, they hear it and they're like, oh, who's that guy? Oh, he did a verse on that record or whatever, you know, stuff that I don't understand, but it's the same thing, you know.
Yeah, I do think that world is better at that for the reason of collaboration. I think in the other genres, it's less of that, and I don't know. I mean, it depends. Like if we're talking about Spotify, I have such a passive, even me, as a music enthusiast of sorts. I can hear a song I love, and it just be like, I'm not going to disrupt this whole process of listening to whatever's been curated on here. I'm not going to disrupt that by figuring out who this is and going through their catalog and dedicating the time and the focus of my mind to that. Because with Spotify, I'm often hearing music kind of passively anyway. It's not like sitting down and putting a record on the turntable and shit. You know.
Well, yeah. When I was a record buying kid, you know, I might buy a record a week or something, maybe more, less, whatever. But you got that record, and you devoured every bit of it for the next month, you know, in liner notes and headphones, and you focused on it, and you knew it, and you loved it, you know, and you might want to share it, or you might want to go find out, well, who was that guitar player? I'm going to go find out more about him, whatever. But yeah, when it's a passive thing, like streaming or television or anything, it just all flows by you. You know, when Fleetwood Mac put out their record Tusk, I was in school, and I literally spent about a month in every evening hours I wasn't in school listening to it in headphones, just because I thought, I can't hear all this. I gotta focus on this. There's too much going on in here, and I want to hear it, and I did, and it's still like one of my favorite records, and it's still one that when I'm in the studio or with a band or with producers or whatever that I reference, you know, and some of them know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of them know why it's great. Some of them have no idea why is he going on about this weird record. But there's so many things that I do that I still have in my head from that, you know. And it's funny, after I've been like preaching or proselytizing to some of my friends about Tusk, and then see them come back and play something on my records, and I'm like, oh, I know where that came from. You're giving it back to me now, you know. So I'm very passive aggressive maybe, and like pushing my thoughts on them, you know.
Right.
Until they just can't help it, you know.
Do you would it be weird if I asked more about this story that we've been we walked up to, and like what happened with you in the industry and like all that shit? Like, I've read articles about that and things you've said about it before, but I don't know. You mind talking about that?
No, it's in a way it's very kind of complicated and very. it's not tragic or sad or anything. It's just, it was, but in another way, it's very common. You know, it wasn't like, I don't think we were very special. But what happened, like I said, we just kept playing until we got people wanting to see us and telling us to come to New York and play for them. And we went, you know, it finally wound up, we played at places like CBGB's, and record companies would come down and see us play. And the next day they would have us at their offices. And a few months later, we signed with a record company. And so we knew none of the companies were perfect, and also I knew that we were a long way from actually releasing a record. You know, other people got kind of excited or maybe even kind of cocky, like, "Hey, look what we did!" You know, like, "Hold your horses, bud. You know, we got a long way to go." And but we did. We moved to New York, right outside of New York City, for some weird reason. I don't know why. I think they thought that we needed to be there to play for future producers, like to figure out who was going to help us make our record. And being around a big city, there would be more people there, or whatever. In retrospect, I don't think that was anything. But we lived up there for about 9 or 10 months. And one bad consequence is we almost stopped playing live. We had played live all the time and gotten good at what we did. And once we get up there, we didn't play hardly any shows. We just stayed out in our garage and were expected to write songs and, you know, get more and more songs for this potential record, you know. And we got some good songs out of it. But I think we should have been just out playing and just letting something happen, you know. But after a while, we finally talked them into letting us work with Jim Dickinson, who made, he's kind of this weird legendary Memphis cat. You know, he played piano on Wild Horses and played piano with Aretha Franklin, and then he went on to make like Big Star record. He made the Big Star third record, and he's produced a lot of other people. But he was a real redneck Southern artist, like a weirdo guy, and so we liked that. And he came to New York to try to convince them to let him make the record. And he was wearing this like satin like wrestler's jacket, you know, like, and I appreciated that because he knew he wanted to make a outsider impression, you know. And they said, "Yeah, we'll let you do it with Jim Dickinson." And Dickinson swears, he's passed now, but he used to swear that they agreed to it because they thought he was Jim Dixon, who made Byrds records. And but so we went to Memphis to start making a record, and we went to not Sun Studios, but Sam Phillips Studios, where he bought after he sold after he kind of sold Elvis. He built his own studio where they made like Wooly Bully and Cramps records and stuff like that. But we went there and as just kind of a pre-production thing, just to see if we could get along and see if we could make something, and worked for just, I don't know, a little while, made 5 or 6 songs, I think. And then everybody kind of liked them, although they weren't meant to be the finished record. But everybody kind of liked them enough to think, well, okay, we can go to the next stage and make a real record. So we moved to Ardent Studios, where they made Big Star records and ZZ Top records and that kind of stuff. And that was a whole different experience. Like, we weren't quite prepared for how perfect everything was expected to be back then, time-wise, tuning, everything. And we thought Dickinson would fight against that for us because he was such an outsider artist. But I think he thought that this could be his first big, like a pop record in a way. And the record company kind of had that in his head, you know. And but he was my fan too. You know, he's kind of my patron too, and he wanted the best for me. But so he kept thinking, well, if we can just make these first few songs and make something that will get them happy, then we can make the rest of the record cool and weird, you know. And but we made these first 5, and it was just so wrong that I'm the one that kind of had to pull the plug on it and just say, this isn't good. You know, I don't know what you're going to do about it, but we got to start over. And, yeah, I mean, they were willing to go on. They thought, well, this is okay, you know, but I was like, no, it's not okay. Because it just sucked all the life out of what we did, which was kind of ramshackle and rough. And there was people using, you know, we were using the old keyboard called the Fairlight, which everybody made, which Kate Bush made famous and used it the right way. But when you use it to try to make rock records, it's just dumb. ZZ Top used it, but they used it in kind of a good comic book way to make things like Legs and Give Me All Your Lovin' and those kind of songs, which sound like a machine anyway. You know, it sounds like a real funny hot rod, you know, but when you're trying to make kind of sensitive singer-songwriter rock and roll, it was weird. But I did say, I don't think we should put this out, you know. And so they were like, well, okay, we'll just start over. We'll start looking for new producers. And so then, but then it just never quite happened fast enough, you know. They would recommend something and it would be outrageous and dumb. And then, or I would have some idea and they would just look at me like I was from Mars, you know. I wanted us to do some cover songs. They thought that would be a way to have like a first single as a cover. And the ones that they would send me were just atrocious. And I would tell them, and then they would get mad at me. And then they finally would say, well, what would you do? And I sent them a tape of 3 songs that I thought were totally reasonable. I wasn't trying to take the piss at them. There was a George Harrison song, a Tom Waits song, and a Johnny Thunder song that were all I saw as pop songs. I wasn't trying to make a statement, you know.
Which Tom Waits song, by the way?
I think it was called Hang Down Your Head, I think, from Rain Dogs maybe. And a Johnny Thunder song called She's So Untouchable, I think. And the George Harrison song was that What Is Life? Is that what it's called? And it's a total hit. I mean, it was like a hit for him. But they didn't see any sense in that. So after 2.5 years, and this all took 2.5 years of some band changes, I mean, mainly the core band, but my original kind of songwriting partner, Stephen Dubner, he quit after the first trip to Memphis and just decided he wanted to be a writer, literary writer. And he's very successful now. He wrote Freakonomics.
Huh.
And he's the Freakonomics guy.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I hear him on the radio every week and like, Stephen Dubner, Freakonomics. I'm like, hey, Steve. He's a great guy. And we had a few guitar changes, but it was always me and Johnny Worster, the drummer, and my friend Tim playing bass. So after just back and forth of them wanting us to do things and not finding like a perfect producer or whatever, we took one last trip to New York, and our manager said, we're going to go up there and we're going to play for them if they don't say, okay, let's go and make the record now with somebody. We're going to ask to be released, you know. And we played, and Clive Davis came out of his limo for a few minutes and came in and saw us. And so the next morning they had a big meeting, and we weren't there, but it was supposedly very dramatic because all the Arista people, some of them really did like us, like they thought of us as like their little kid brothers, you know, and they're like, they didn't want to screw us over, you know. And so they finally said, well, if we're going to let them go, then we're going to let them go without owing us all this money, because they could have somehow held us to that, because they spent like $250,000 on it, you know. So somehow we got out of it without having to. We were free, you know. And our managers came out just thrilled. They're like, "This is great. We're free. We can just walk down the street to the next record company." They just thought like the next day was just going to be like going to all of them and like, okay, who's ready for these great, handsome Southern boys? But that just did not happen, you know. It just wasn't as easy as that. And so it just, the next few years were just us trying to figure out a way back in and playing some shows, getting a new manager that took us out to California, and we played, and nothing much happened. People would come see us, and I think we were just, I think we were psychically kind of broken in a way. Me and my friend Johnny Worcester, who plays now, he's the best current professional musician of all of us. He plays with the Mountain Goats and John and Bob Mould and Superchunk as their drummer. I mean, he's like the indie rock drummer, and he's the best guy. And he's also kind of an online comedian. Like, some people know him better as a comedian than they do as a drummer. But I think we did just like, we didn't realize it at the time, but I think it did just kind of break us in a way, you know, and it took us a while. And so Johnny just, you know, he left eventually after this trip to California, and some of the rest of them left. And so it was just me, like, starting over, just like, you know, do I want to keep writing songs? And so eventually I did, and I had a batch of songs, and Don Dixon, who has been one of my oldest friends in the, you know, record business, you know, he heard them, he's like, let's make a record, you know. And so he came down to, he was coming to Charlotte to Reflection Studios, where he used to make a lot of records. And he said, I'm coming down tomorrow, let's record some. And, you know, I had kind of had a band, but I said, okay, we'll be there. And so we recorded 3 songs all in one night. And I think we even almost mixed them that night. I mean, they were done, and they were good. And they were the beginning of what became the record called the Pine Tops. I had a band called the Pine Tops. And that was like 3 songs that were on that record. And so a few months later, we came out to my barn in Pofftown, and he set up in the studio, in the barn, and made a studio. And we recorded what became this Pine Tops record called Above Ground and Vertical. And there's still songs in there that we play, you know. Still, there's a song called So Lonesome I Could Fly that for some reason has had a life, kind of a little bit of life, like it's been in several TV shows and movies, and some other people have sung it. And I still play it, still like it all right. And that was released on some real record labels, but they were relatively small. There was one here in Boston and another one in Germany. And we played at South by Southwest at that time. And then that kind of, like all these things, they just kind of run their course, you know, and people have real lives, and they have real things that they kind of have to get to, or they've decided, I'm going to do this now. I'm not going to be a bass player. I'm going to be this kind of guy.
Yeah.
You know? And, but so I had work, I had jobs. I either worked, you know, when I was younger, I worked some with my dad. We had a sporting goods store. And then as I got older, I painted houses, and I did stuff so I could keep playing music.
Yeah.
And also when I got married and had a child, I kept painting houses so I could be a good dad and take off if I had to, or do things with my daughter, you know. And so I was the one that could do those things. But all that time, I did keep making songs at home, and they just kind of became the records that I've made in the last 15 years or whatever. You know, I made one called Million Star Hotel, and one called The Arrow, and then and another little weird EP that came out. It was kind of an accident. It was just live recordings that I made, mostly at the garage, with just a little DAT one mic, and I did them just to see what I sounded like, really. And Don Dixon heard them, and he said, "You should put this out as a record." I said, "Why?" He's like, "It will enhance your reputation as a weirdo." And so that came out kind of after the Pine Tops, before Million Star Hotel, I think. And then I made that one last year called I'm Starting to Bleed. And that was an EP. And that one I did all at home by myself, pretty much, with a little help of sending it to some friends that played keyboards or whatever on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the whole record biz thing was, a lot happened in 2 or 3 years. Like, looking back on it now, like, it seemed like it was a big thing, but now it's like, man, it's just compressed a couple of years of, you know, kind of being excited, having some hopes, and thinking, I didn't let myself get ahead of the idea of we've made it, you know. I knew we had made it, and I kept reminding our other pals, like, you know, we're not close to that yet, you know. But if I'll be honest, I did think, well, something's going to happen. I'm
Yeah.
not sure what's going to happen.
Of course you would.
What kind of record? I'm not sure what the record's going to sound like or what the videos are going to look like. But you know, because we had managers and we had a record label, you kind of just think, because they even had like release dates for the record in Billboard magazine, you know, that I would see, like the Pine Top's coming out in spring '87 or whatever, and so you do think something's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And so when it doesn't, it's just it's a little bit to think about, you know, when you're 26, whatever years old. And I think one thing that just occurred to me in the last year or two that kind of stuck with us, or stuck with me, is that, and that I'm trying to shake, is that when we came back home from like New York and also just the biz in general, it almost seemed like people treated us like almost like war heroes or something. Like we had gone and kind of fought hard and lost, but they also still kind of expected us to wear our uniform or something. Like that's what they wanted us to be. Like, oh, they did great. They're good guys. They tried, you know, and that kind of freezes you and like amber, you know, you're like, that's what they wanted you to be. And so I had to like, you know, and recently I've just realized, no, that's not who I am, you know, and that's not, and it wasn't that big a deal, even though it's, at the time it seemed kind of like a big thing. But that happens to bands all the time, all over the country. You know, it's just that we were here and people knew us here. And I'm sure every town has their favorite band that went off, and then they wonder, like, why didn't they have records on the radio? They sound as good as what's on the radio, you know. And they may have sounded just as good. It's just that there's so many things that go into it that this just has to be, it's just all that luck, you know. You have to have the band has to be good. You have to look a certain way of the time. You have to have the right kind of manager, lawyer, business stuff, and maybe find a producer that's really wants to be almost part of the band, or that's like really sympathetic to you. You know, I think the way Tom Petty and them found Jimmy Iovine to like whip them into shape and make those like Damn the Torpedoes and records, the few records after that, and just kind of teach them how to do it, you know. And our friends, the Del Fuegos, our managers managed them, and they had this guy named Mitchell Froome, who still makes records and soundtrack things, and he's the one that kind of took them and taught them how to make records, you know. And we just didn't quite have that, you know. We never had. So I think you have to have all these luck things. You know, nowadays you don't have to have all that,
Right.
because you can make it on your computer and put it out the next day.
Yeah.
And I still don't know if that's better or worse. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends. But
Because it's like you said, if there's 60,000 records coming out every day,
yeah.
then who's going to hear them? Yeah, I don't know.
Something you said really stuck with me. The part about the uniform, part about coming back, having lost the war or whatever, and that I notice a lot of times when I'm out in town, and when I see people that have known me for years, they get this look in their eye, and this like,
You still playing music?
that's exactly it. You still playing your music, and like with the tilt of the head and
Like,
with the
oh,
like,
that's darling.
like
that you're
exactly
still playing music.
Exactly.
That's sweet of you. That's
And it
You
is
keep it
so, yeah, so patronizing.
even when they totally mean well.
Of course, but like, it's like if it were the other way around, if I were an Avett brother, you know, it would be like music was this triumphant word that was like, you know, look how you defied the odds, look how reality really opened up to reward you for your skills or whatever. But because I'm not playing to amphitheaters full of like 20,000 people,
Yeah.
music is this word that means like dream that wasn't realized or
Yeah.
hasn't been realized or something.
And some kind of failure or some kind of, even if they consider it noble, it's still a noble fighting at the windmills or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even when people say that you're a success, like in my work, when people like introduce me to somebody else or whatever, they'll say, "Oh, Jeff, he's the rock star," and then that's even weirder because then you have to explain, like, no, I'm not. But there's some truth to it. Some people do know who I am. Some people have heard my records.
Yeah.
But you don't want to have to explain all that.
Right.
You don't want to have to explain it's the flip side of having to explain people why they should like you, which is exhausting. And I've given up.
Yeah.
Like sending letters. Back in the day, we used to have to send cassette tapes or whatever, and real letters to record companies, and you have to explain why they should pay attention to you. And of course there's, people that get paid to do that, publicists and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's one side of it, is showing, talking somebody in why you're good, why they should spend their time with you. And on the other flip side is like when they say you're, the next question, somebody says, "Hey, he's the rock star. He's the one that's got a band." Then the next question is like, "Well, have I heard you?" And you're like, "Well, I don't know. Have you heard me? Probably not." Does that mean I'm not any good? Maybe it is. Maybe it does mean that. I don't know. Then there's just layers of questions that open up, that you feel like you have to explain. Mm-hmm. But I don't usually explain it, because I have kind of adopted a motto that I think came from Lemmy from Motorhead, by way of Chrissie Hynde from Pretenders, who said, "Don't complain, don't explain." So I'm trying to leave it at that.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good. I think it works in all aspects of life to some degree. Because I think a lot of times a lot of us are programmed to be nice and be liked, or not disappoint somebody when they're asking you a question about something, or, because if they may be concerned and want the best for you, but you still, I still think it's best to just leave it and just be a good person otherwise, That's one thing that I think a lot of people that are musicians or artists or whatever go through. It's an emotional thing. If it's not, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Even people that probably act like they're not sensitive, emotional people, they are. If you're writing songs, you're accessing something, that's a little bit under the surface. And when you're accessing those things, things can get in, get infected or whatever, and so people can get. It can make people have little cracks in them,
Yeah.
So I feel lucky that I'm still relatively sane and relatively healthy.
Yeah.
And I have a great daughter who's much more naturally musical than I am. Like, she can really hear like every note and all the harmonies and just does it, And she has great taste, and she had her first DJ session of the year this year at her college out in California. And
she's DJing?
Mm-hmm. She's did a few last year, and then she did that one Sunday was the first one of this semester. But it's great. It's just all over the place, from, Fela Kuti, world music, to, Jobim, to, there was one section where she played Bob Dylan, Cheap Trick, and Johnny Thunders in a row. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's my daughter.
Hell yeah, man.
I know. And she's a great singer. I just sent her some recording gear because she wanted to start working again on making some songs and all. When she was young, I remember one time over maybe a Christmas holiday or maybe in summer when she wasn't in school, and she was just kind of laying around the house, staying in her PJs, and I was thinking, like, you need to get up and get outside and, get some sun, do something. And I had to go to work, and I came back and she was still in her pajamas, and so I'm like, what'd you do today? Did you get out and do something? She said, I recorded some stuff. And and she'd done this entirely solo version with all these parts of Space Oddity. And it's like, that's a pretty good day's work. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
I like the home recording setup, obviously. I mean, it's cool. There's some records that come to mind. Did you ever hear, you ever hear Benji, Sun Kill Moon?
Oh yeah, I know of those records. Yeah.
Benji in particular, just like that's one that really sounds like home recordings, and there's things about it that are so imperfect, and that one is untouchable. It's one of the best albums I've ever heard. You know, and I love that exists, and that he, like that was made. And there's other moments like that, even worse ones, even like Nebraska, or even one of Keith Whitley's albums has this song that he recorded with like probably a 2-channel tape recorder. It sounds like, I think you hear like the TV on in the background and stuff.
Oh yeah. Well,
And
I guess
I love shit like that.
Nebraska was one of the. I mean, people had little weird home setups for years but they were always oddball guys that now are revered, but back then nobody could put their records out. But you're right, Nebraska was probably one of the first things that was not a studio polished thing, that somebody had the wisdom at some point to like say, no, this is probably as good as it's going to get. Because they re-recorded almost all their songs with the E Street Band. I mean, there's versions of all those things, and they're just not as cool.
Yeah.
So they had the wisdom to understand that. But you're right, like some home recordings, most people now that do home recordings, they strive to make them sound as good as pop records. And it's almost whether it's pop music like Beyonce or whatever, you could almost do that at home, because that is all computer generated stuff for the most part. But you're not going to make like the perfect sounding pop records like Tom Petty and Rick Rubin made or something. But it is cool when you hear home recordings, like you said, that are meant to sound like they were done in the living room.
Yeah.
And not striving for that and failing, like doing, this is what I want it to sound like.
It's a weird balance, because then like there's also whatever TikTok and all this shit is, and it's like that doesn't have enough mysteriousness in it to make it interesting to me, when I'm just like, clearly someone just cut on their phone and they're just like, they're doing like the thing right now is this. I'm not going to dignify it with the details of what I was about to say, but there is with TikTok, like a piece of a song will get really popular.
Yeah.
And so the thing will be, okay, well, I'll just make a video of me doing that same piece, because that's the trend. Like everybody's recording themselves doing like 5 lines of a song. I don't use TikTok, but I see these things.
I don't know much about it at all, but it does seem like that's what happens. Is like there's tiny little things that become. Yeah, I don't know if they're hit. I mean, it's not like a hit record, but I guess things can become hit records then if that's the part. Like if they took a part from a Marvin Gaye song or something. Yeah. Then some people go back and buy the Marvin Gaye record.
I think that is the idea, or like the even the whatever the code is, the code that's associated with the song. It's getting hit after hit after hit.
Yeah,
One of those things goes viral. So like the streaming numbers, I think technically are going up.
Oh, okay. So they do that code is embedded in it, so they get credit somehow for that. I have one. I just found it accidentally a couple years ago. One song of mine. Maybe there's another one, but there's one song of mine that somebody made a TikTok thing from, and I'm proud that it is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I mean, it's pretty weird. It's like, just like all of them, it's like 15 seconds long or something. But it's like some weird filter, and it looks like a mask, and it looks like you can't even tell if it's a boy or girl, human, alien. And there's in this one song off of the Million Star Hotel record. It's not a poppy song. It's like a weird, sad song. And it's just that. I'm like, man, if I'm going to have one TikTok, that's a good one.
Hell yeah. I've not seen any evidence of me on TikTok
No,
yet.
I didn't either. I don't even know how I found this. But it's weird. Maybe I'll get a normal one someday, but it's a good way to start.
I'm gonna throw you a curveball real quick. Like with everything we were talking about, I mean, I haven't had the ups of the career that you have. You know, I've it's been a lot more down to earth, a lot more just like I've played a lot of shows. You know, some people like the shit that I do, but
Yeah,
I
they
haven't
do.
reached thousands and thousands or anything like that. And I found that I reached a point with all this, like seeing what the internet was doing to the music industry, seeing what the internet was doing to like music consumption and music creation, that I was sort of like really disenchanted with it. And this also goes with some other shit with like religious stuff and with like the way I see the world. And basically, I had my own come down moment of kind of feeling disenchanted in a different way. And it really challenged my commitment to the musician identity. And that's, I've noticed like, I mean, like right now, you and I are dressed like this. You know what I mean? And I don't know, this isn't like a whole different world from how I would dress on stage, but like there's like this thing. There's like this thing, this level of seriousness that you can have, or you go out and you have like, it's a little bit more like a wardrobe or a costume, or you you fucking like have
Yeah.
that attitude.
And I like that part of it.
I didn't
you know,
know. It's
I mean,
great.
with some artists, you know, I think it's all part of the package.
It
you know?
is. I mean, and it's like I have no cynicism about necessarily that, but I found myself not feeling like I could after the disenchantment came in. I found myself not able as much to give myself into the whole pageantry of it. And I feel like that's part of the musician identity
of
you know what I mean?
presenting yourself as something like
Yeah.
a concept or
Yeah.
a brand or whatever. Yeah.
I don't know if you ever had any experience with that or not, but that was, I guess,
Well,
the question.
I think I've always had a little bit of ambivalence, even though I respect the idea of being an artist or a songwriter. Like, I think it's almost it's not just noble, but I think it's almost kind of a religious thing to be able to, and I tell my other musician friends when they get down, like I get down, you know, what we do is pretty special. We make something that wasn't there an hour before, or it wasn't there last week, and now it's this thing. We made it out of nothing, just like a sculpture or whatever. And not everybody can do that. You know, to us it seems, even though it seems hard to write the great song, it is. We could sit here and we could make up a song because we can, and without, because we know how to do it.
Yeah.
But not everybody can do that. Most people can't do it. So
Right.
it is kind of special. But, you know, then there's the flip of like, well, okay, but so what? You know, can you build a house? Can you, you know, heal a child or whatever?
Right.
But yeah, so I do value it and think it's like a great thing to be. And then, but when I'm out around real people, which I am around real people a lot in my job, I realize sometimes how trivial it can be, you know, to think that you're special.
Man, yeah.
But you have to think you're special
Yeah.
to do it.
That's exactly right.
So it's always a seesaw, I guess.
You captured exactly my crisis like perfectly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And it's because I know that that's what makes it better, and that's honestly what makes, I think, other people gravitate toward you, is like when you deeply can connect to believing that what you're doing is worthwhile and special and unique, and you believe it enough that you actually embody that uniqueness. But yeah, then I run into these negative vibes of just like,
Oh yeah.
it's not important in the greater context, and that is cynicism in a way. It's kind of it's not necessary to think like that.
But I think it comes down to it. You just have to enjoy doing it. For no other reward, other than you made it. You made this thing.
The craft.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's the same thing as somebody. You know, if you lived out here in the woods, and you were whittling, you know, mallard ducks, you know, out of wood, and you had this thing, some people would love it, would appreciate it, but not everybody, you know. But you still made this beautiful thing. It doesn't mean, and because nobody saw it, doesn't mean that it's not cool.
Right.
or that's not valuable, it's not beautiful. You know, you do judge things by, some kind of business thing or popularity thing. And I'm not saying that I haven't been up and down a lot, thinking like, well, man, why am I still doing this? Or should I have had a real job or a real thing? But then my smart friends or therapists or anybody would tell you, no, you did do these things. These are great. These are you did have a real job, whatever you want to call it, whatever real job is. But you made things, and you were just being yourself, and you were going through. You were following some kind of path.
I think it's also sometimes you have a real life, and like sometimes pursuing that craft that's having a real life, and we think so much about the practicalities that come with jobs. Like, well, do you have a real job? Do you have health insurance? Do you have a death, like plan? And you have a
yes, I have a death plan.
Life insurance.
I will be dead. Let you deal with it.
Yeah, you have a life insurance policy and a fucking 401k and all this shit, and it's like all that stuff is cool. It's very smart that people that we have these things in society, but to measure that up against a life of pursuing something that you like actually deeply fucking care about and really try to master being great at, it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to dismiss trying to be great at something.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love watching or listening to people, anybody that's good at something that they've really focused on, whether it's being a electrician or a mechanic or anything. I just love watching somebody that's really good at that thing.
No kidding.
I love it gives me just good feelings and tingles, It's like this ASMR thing of just like watching a guy talk about the carburetor or talk about all the, if there's salesmen selling you something and they're talking about all the different things. It's just, it's a beautiful thing to really know something inside out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I even know that. I mean, the only thing I know really well is probably just like top 40 and minutia of music, like I'm not that much into one thing. I don't know everything there is to know about bluegrass or jazz music or, I like all of it. And I have friends that are like, know everything there is to know about the Beatles, every record they ever made and all the different pressings and numbers on them and everything. And I've just never gone that deep into any of them. I think my thing is just more about trying to make something. And as you get older, as I've gotten older, it's been less easy to make them over and over and quickly, But the last ones I made, the last record I made last year, I'm proud of those. I don't think I've made. And this isn't really a boast. It's just because I don't think I've made any bad records yet, but that's just because I haven't made a lot of them. I mean, I made myself just like I didn't want to make bad records. And I was content if I couldn't make but one every 5 or 6 years or even more, I was still okay with that. But you could take the other tack of like, well, no, you should just go out and just knock it out, make a bunch of songs, because that's the way to do it too. It's just like, don't be precious about everything. Yeah. I know that everything, a lot of these things I'm saying like there's this, but there's the flip side. But that's the way it is, I think, when you're trying to be a artist or some kind of a slightly outside of society, you're always like looking at that other side.
Yeah.
And you're always trying to see if you can balance it or, unless you just go all the way into society and you're, trading stocks, or you go all the way to this side and you're just a insane artist living in a cabin, like we almost are. So you're always looking back and forth, so it's, I don't know where I was going with that, other than it's always a balance of like trying to be happy where you are and happy with what you've done and what you do day to day. And also this other nagging part of like, but I want to make the great song.
Yeah.
Not so much, I mean, I have no illusions that if I wrote a really great song next week, that it would be like a hit song. You know, that's, even if I'd done it 35 years ago when I was in like the record biz thing, it still wouldn't have been like Satisfaction or something. It wouldn't, you know, there's just not that going to happen. But just for my own sake, you know, to write a song like that, I believe like, oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know, that does, and I do I'm okay if I write something that gives me just even the tiniest bit of buzz that the records that I grew up loving gave me, you know. So if you write something yourself, you know, it's hard for you to totally love it because you know how it was made and you can't really hear it the way a normal person would hear it. But as you're making it, sometimes you can kind of get excited about a little thing, you know, in your own song. And if my own song could make me feel just a tiny bit like, you know, Ray Davies in Waterloo Sunset or something like that, then I feel like, okay, that's good enough. You know, that's worth doing, you know.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think I experience songs slightly differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think I trained myself to. There's that stuff we were talking about, the identity part. That's like the ego part that needs to believe it. When it's active, it's convinced that like whatever song's on the table is just like, well, this is as good as songs get.
That's right. This guy is good. Look how handsome he is too.
Exactly. And he's so tall.
That's right.
Tall and wealthy. Yeah. Yeah. That's how it works. It just is that devoted to its own genius or whatever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you do have to believe that you're special to even think that you deserve. Why would you get out in front of people? And that's a pretty narcissistic thing in a way, you know, an ego-driven thing like that. You think they would want to look at you or listen to you do something.
Right.
So you have to build yourself up to be something bigger than you really believe in. So you're always kind of fooling yourself a little bit because you know, like, I'm not really a charismatic rock star. I'm not David Bowie.
Even David Bowie is only David Bowie.
He sure is. Oh, well, he's an odd one because he really did, except for maybe a couple of years, he really did separate himself. He was David Jones when he wasn't on stage, and so he knew that, and he knew how to separate it. He had a few times where they overlapped, and he kind of lost his mind for a couple of years. But for the most, and especially in the later years, he was David Jones, and David Bowie was a thing that he could put on. And I mean, there's stories of him being in like big cities and like being in New York and walking down the street and nobody bothering him, and people his friend would be with him or a writer or whatever. It's like, do they not know you're David Bowie? He's like, you want to see that? And he would just turn it on, and then people come out of the woodwork.
Wow.
Just the way he walked, the way he presented himself. He didn't go change clothes or anything. He just turned it on.
Yeah.
And it was a thing, you know. And
that is fascinating.
Yeah, I know. But you do have to be, you have to believe in yourself to some degree, and then fight the ego part of it, I guess.
Keep it, try not to be a asshole about it,
Yeah.
What do you think? Why did we both find ourselves in the woods?
Well, in my case, I was looking for a house that me and my daughter could live in that would be a special thing, that wasn't just an apartment that we couldn't afford or a house in some part of town that didn't mean anything, you know. And I kept waiting and very patient, trying to like wait for something. I kept thinking, well, somebody's going to have a place that they want me to be, or something's going to want me to be to this place. And so I kept being patient, even though I kept needing to find a place. And a friend of a friend just said, this friend of mine has a place that she wants somebody to live in. The rent's going to be fairly cheap because she wants you to take care of it and take care of the land and all that. And I like doing that stuff.
Yeah.
I would feel weird if I wasn't taking care of the land. And so that's worked out. I mean, I guess if I could have ended up in town, but something kept me from going there. I didn't want to be there. And so now I have this place that's kind of like your place here that no one would ever find if I didn't tell them how to get here. And during the last couple COVID years, even though I was lucky in that I had a job where I still went to, because we never closed at the Shalom Project. We still had the medical clinic and food pantry that we had to run. So I was lucky that I was still around people, so that grounded me and kept me healthy in that way. And I had a thing I felt like was worth doing. But I also think being out in the woods, like, not seeing people and stuff, I'm kind of okay with that for the most part. If I didn't have a job and see some of the people that I really love every few days, maybe I would go crazy. So I think I was just lucky that I'm okay with the quiet. And when I felt like the world had slowed down, because a lot of things just weren't happening, it made me feel better. I felt horrible for the sickness in the world and the tragic effects that it had on everything. But inside me, it felt better. And I think it was just because selfishly, it made me feel like the world wasn't flying by me. Made me feel like it was more at my speed. And so when I started making that record that became I'm Starting to Bleed, I just felt like I was at my own speed. And I felt like, well, nobody's doing anything. Nobody's running ahead of me. Nobody's getting there faster. I'm just, I don't have to hurry. I'm just doing it. And it just flowed quickly. It was just like, and I wasn't even making a record. I was just making some demos or songs or something. And a friend of mine heard one of the songs, the title song, and he said, "Why don't you?" And he was in my very first band, a gentleman named Michael Kurtz. He was in my very first band in 1981 or whatever. But he now is the head honcho of Record Store Day all over the world. I mean, he kind of invented it. And he said, "Why don't you let me put out that song on a 12-inch for Record Store Day, and we'll have it benefit the Shalom Project." This was all his idea. And I said, well, okay. I hadn't even thought about what I was going to do with the song. And I said, well, why don't I try to find some more songs that somehow make it a little more of an album, So it's a 5-track thing. But that's how that came, totally accident of just like, I wasn't making a record, I was just making some songs. And I had one song that I really liked, a song called Tell Somebody, and I had made a version of it that I just thought, well, I'm just making a version so that I can play for other musicians, and we'll make a real version at some point with real drummers and real players. And Don Dixon heard it, and he said, well, why do you want to re-record it? He said, it's not going to get better. He said, it's not going to get any more exciting. It's already exciting. It's probably going to get worse. And I'm like, you're right. And he's always been good. Don Dixon always has so many ideas, and I don't agree with all of them. I don't have to agree with all of them, but he just has so many, and he's always like, do this. He's very pragmatic, just like, let's get it going, And I said, well, why don't you try at least remixing it? And he said, okay, I'll do it. And he sent it back, and it just sounded great. And I even heard bass on it that I hadn't heard. And I said, you replay bass, because he's like a world-class bass player. He's on the road with Mary Chapin Carpenter now, I said, you replayed that bass, right? And he said, no, man, I just turned yours up, And it's like, I did that? And that whole record was just kind of an accident, things that just kind of came together. And so I'm hoping to be able to create that again somehow. You can't really create something again by accident. Something else has to happen to create some new storm, But But yeah, it is a decision now of how to put records out. You know, are you supposed to make something, tangible thing, because we all grew up loving these tangible things,
Right.
or is it fine enough just to put it in the ether and they stream it or whatever? I like records, but they're expensive to make, expensive to buy. Not even good for the ecosystem, I guess, either. I don't know. Not that my little bit's going to make any difference. I mean, if I could make a real record every and make every year or so, it'd be great, But I don't know. I don't know how to do it necessarily. I think I'll just make enough songs, and then I'll have friends tell me that's good, or let's do this to it, or whatever. I have been probably less, instead of like taking the reins and like, I'm going to make this kind of record this year. Like I've probably been less like that and more like, I've just got these things and I'm just going to see where it goes. And then usually I have friends that will hear it and it'll go some direction, So yeah, I could afford to be more proactive about my own
I'm sure
output or whatever.
I'm sure we all could. It is what it is, but
I know. Oh, speaking of home recordings, so I guess this goes back to our home recording records that sound like they were made in a house.
Uh-huh.
You need to, if you haven't heard it, you need to go hear "Will to Love" by Neil Young.
Okay.
It's on his record, American Stars and Bars, same record that has Like a Hurricane and some other songs. But there's a 11 or 12 minute song called "Will to Love" that is one of the most special tracks ever, because he did it all one night in his house. He rented he told like SIR, one of the studio rental places, to bring him out a drum kit and bring out a Fender Rhodes and bring out a xylophone or whatever, set up in his living room, probably like this. And he had a fireplace, and you can hear the fireplace is almost the lead instrument. It's almost the loudest thing on the track, and you hear it popping all the time, the pine just popping, and there's it's acoustic guitar and a bunch of singing, but it's so loose and just swirling around, and it sounds like a love song, and it is a love song, but if you really look, the narrative, the literal words are about a salmon swimming upstream, and how he has the will to love. And how he's dodging the harpoons, and he's just, he has the will to do it, But it's a beautiful song, but I know he was I think he had taken a bunch of peyote or something, and
sure,
it was like an all-night odyssey. But he did it all in one setting, and so it's one of the ultimate home recordings.
I've never heard it.
You're going to be in for a treat.
I look forward to reminding myself when I edit this to pull that up while I do that. Of course, the basement tapes come to mind, classic.
Uh-huh.
Trying to think of really that the Keith Whitley song is called "Tell Lori I Love Her," and it's so sad because it's like I think it was the only album he put out as a country megastar, and it's like it might be the last song on the track, and the whole song is about if I was stranded and my life was about to end, tell Lori Morgan, that she was the only girl for me anyway. And then like a couple years later, he ended up going before his time. And just real sad in the context of Keith, who just was like a fucking.
He was a great songwriter.
Great singer.
Yeah.
He seemed like a real cool guy.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I'll have to check that out.
I'll try to remember to send it to you. Okay. Tell Lori I love her.
Yeah.
So
what are you gonna do? What's your next thing? You gonna make some?
I was about to say, like, Doug asked me the same thing because I've been sitting here trying to figure out the same shit you and I are talking about, like, what do we do? And Doug also asked me, and I think my answer is getting somewhere. Like when he was here, I felt a lot more like, man, fuck it, I don't know. But I feel like, well, Caleb told me. I was asking him like what about some ideas I was having, and he said, I think right now in the world, no one knows what to do, and everybody's just the idea is throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks for you, and everything's as good an idea as anything else.
I think that's right. I think it's kind of a wild west.
It is a little bit, and I'm not going to start a TikTok, but
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people are using that in a way that's helping their careers out or whatever. But I don't want to give in too much. I don't want to make my music smaller and smaller and smaller necessarily. I want to continue to push against the grain a little bit and try to make it more of an experience and bigger. And so I don't know. One thing I've been playing with is on something I heard the term visual album, and that intrigued me. And of course, like Lemonade by Beyonce comes to mind, and like a lot of cool works that interpret albums. Like Cash Valley Morrison, she did her movie. I think I want to take it a little more in the home recording world though, and like kind of do more documentation of the artistic process, maybe like remove the fourth wall a little bit. Though then again, throughout the conversation, I've been really unsure about that, because like where we started was talking kind of about the value of the fourth
mystery.
wall. Yeah. So I don't know. That doesn't.
But it can be done. It can. All these things, like I said, that
like Wilco did that.
Like
or whatever,
there's plenty of people that are totally open with their audience and communicate with their audience all the time about what they did that day.
Yeah.
And my first intuition when I see that is like, oh no, don't tell everybody everything.
Yeah.
Just don't. But people know how it works for some people, you know, and they're just, and that connects with people. And they, I think I just grew up in a time where you didn't really know artists, because if you didn't see them on TV when I was young, the only thing you saw was the record. And even then, there might not even be a picture on the front. There could be bands that had hit records that you had no idea what they looked like, and that was kind of a cool thing.
I love that.
Yeah, and so I think just coming from that era, I kind of like it, but that era is long gone. So now, and so you do have to.
Well, sort of
connect somehow, even if it's in a quiet. Even if your connection is that you don't talk to them, you have some way, even like if somebody as poetic and strong as like Nick Cave, he has a tremendous like online conversation with his fans. He talks all the time to them. People write him letters and he writes big letters back, like serious, really thoughtful letters.
Yeah.
And, he's about as serious a performer and songwriter as you could get, and he doesn't. I think he lets the songs still have the mystery, hopefully, but he's not afraid to be a human and talk about it.
I mean, yeah, man, that's like that was a reservation I had when I started this thing, was because I was like, this is really showing people my creative space and showing them a conversational side of me that also is opinionated and shit. And it's that's different. That's not what I do with the music, and so I had to think about that a lot doing this. I decided to go with it, and I have been glad I did. I don't know if it necessarily benefits my music in any way, but it does benefit, I think, my connection to people who give a shit about me as a person and just like our community, like our real community that we live in. And whatever, if that benefits the music in any way, that's cool by me, but I don't know. But, so that's one of my thoughts. My primary thought is... You used a phrase that I agree with about the religious component that there is when it comes to identities like this, including music ones. And I do think there's like magic and stuff involved. And I think for me, wherever we are in the world right now is really tough on places like the Ramcat and Gas Hill and like getting people there. And I want to continue to try to draw people to experience that with us, with the musicians. But in the meantime, I was mentioning to you, like I had this party where some musicians came over and we played, and this too is an extension of this idea. It's like my interest right now is relating to people as musicians instead of like feeling like there's any competition or there's any like, well, who's the best at this or whatever. Like I'm kind of, that's all set aside.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like relate to people and look for opportunities to like maybe play music around people and enjoy music together as a community, as music appreciators and as music creators. So that's like one of my big values right now, and I'm also letting that inform, I think, how I'm going to approach my creative stuff. Like I want to, that's I think the inspiration to make it more visible to people is just like sharing that space with more people instead of it being this like thing that not that many people are allowed to know about or something.
Yeah, I think it can be, and you can figure out a way to do it to where you still make very personal songs and records, and show some of the process, some of the whatever, and it have a connection, but still not mess with the magic of the songs. You'll figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I need to, I always want to connect with. I mean, when you make a song, you don't, even though the big reward for me is making it and just having it be there, the next step is like, well, it would be nice if somebody heard it and then they said, oh, that did something to me.
Right.
They don't really quite live totally in a vacuum, although sometimes I'm fine with them living there. But yeah, you do like people to hear what you do, I guess. And so yeah, any way you can get them out there to where they even want to hear it, seriously listen enough. Like you said, if something was on streaming or television in the background, it is very passive, and it's hard to get somebody to hear a song even all the way through once. If they want to hear it, if they will listen to it all the way through once and maybe again, that's a big deal.
That's kind of a miracle.
These days, yeah. So yeah, making it all the way through is one thing in the world of TikTok and 15-second songs or whatever. But we can't try to like fit into all that stuff. Like you just got to do what you like. And I happen to like weird long records and things that aren't spelled out right away, that you don't quite know what they mean because they stick with you for a long time.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of things that are just immediate, like a James Brown record. You're like, I know what that means. I love it.
No kidding.
I know.
Well, I guess in closing, I guess we can start wrapping it up. Okay. I mean, what do you, what do you have like coming up and shit?
Well, tangible, worldly things. I have a show tomorrow night at the Ramcat Gas Hill Room. My friend Laura Lynn Dossett is a longtime friend and kind of collaborator. I've sung with her and she's sung with me. She's going to come and open for us, and we're going to play some with her, and we're going to make her kind of rock in a way. We kind of push her. We had a rehearsal the other day, and it's fun to hear her sing over some noise.
Yeah.
And then she'll sing some with me. She's such a great harmony singer that, we don't have to really practice. She knows how to find harmonies, and I'm a horrible harmony singer, so she just makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. So we're going to do that tomorrow night with the full band. And then I think I've got some kind of show in October, but I think the main thing is trying to figure out kind of what we've been talking about, like how to make a next something, whether it's an album or just a bunch of songs, singles, I don't know, knit a scarf or something, make something, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to work a little bit more on Angus McLaughlin's movie that we made some music for, and so that'll be something to look forward to. I do like. I'm always battling the impulses of living out here in the woods, being by myself, and and then also needing to be around people, not just friends for human contact, but in a musical context. Just knowing that if you're around people that you like and admire that are better than you at something, that things are going to happen.
Right.
And I always underestimate that. I just think like I don't leave the house.
I know.
But when I do, and I sit with some other guitar player, some other singer, or some other writer, that I like, and that I admire, that I think are better than me, or at least not better, just like that I think are right, that feel good to me. Then things happen, and you realize like this was easy because I was around some other people. We accidentally wrote a song, whereas if I'd sat at home, I would have just found all kinds of reasons not to do it or not to finish it. So I think the being with people is good, and you don't need that many people. You just need a few friends, I think that's the good thing to end on. Like I have a song of mine, there's a line that's totally dumb and simple. Like, sometimes you need a friend, all you need is a few. And Laura Lynn has sung this with me, someone to lay you in your bed and watch over you. And you don't need many, you just need a handful that you feel like, get you, and, you don't have to try to convince everybody to like you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
That is fitting. A buddy of mine sent me a little video of Joey Diaz kind of saying something like, Jody is a comedian I like a lot. Saying something very similar, just the value of a couple of real friends compared to like a dozen not real ones.
Yeah. Well, the singer Chuck Prophet always calls them airport friends. Like, how many friends do you have that will actually pick you up at the airport?
I like that.
That you could call and you knew they would be there.
About how many friends would wake up at 4 in the morning to take your ass?
Yeah, like 3 or 4 maybe,
Yeah.
if that, So,
yeah.
Here's to airport friends.
No kidding. Well, Jeffrey Dean Foster, I think we did it. I think we made the perfect podcast episode.
All right. Exciting. Thank you, Tyler.
Dude, thanks for real for doing this and for like indulging in all my curiosities about your career so far. So,
well, thanks for having me out to the woods.
Hell
it's
yeah.
Beautiful out here.
Well, come back again when we get the music happening.
Yeah.
And we'll play some music.
This would be a great place to do something.
Hell yeah, man.
Okay. See you soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.